Hey, welcome to BigRobsVan. On today,
in my previous video, I filled all the holes in the floor of my van using a JB Weld steel stick and was still struggling with exactly how I wanted to build the new floor for my van. For research, I watched hundreds of van tours and tutorials about how other people built their vans. And the more videos I watched, the more I began to realize that there are dozens of different ways to build the floor of a camper van. Now, before we get into what I ended up choosing, I want to tell you about an issue I have with YouTube called the 6-month problem. And to explain that, I want to show you this battery that I bought for my van. Now, don't worry, this is not an advertisement and I do not have any affiliate links. Now, one of my biggest problems with YouTube reviews and tutorials is something I like to call the 6-month factor. I bought this battery 6 months ago for my van. I owned it for 48 hours and I made a very positive review, which I posted on both Amazon and YouTube. I talked about all the USB charging ports, the 110 charging ports, your DC 12-volt ports. It's a really good battery. The problem is 6 months later, it doesn't work. Most of the time it won't even turn on, and a lot of the times it won't charge anything unless it's actually plugged into the wall, which kind of defeats the purpose for a battery for my van. So you can see the problem. When the item was new, I had a really positive experience, and that's when I made my review. But what most people don't do is a review 6 months later on items like this. And that's the problem I have with watching all these videos about people's floors in their vans. People put in all different kinds of floors and they're really happy about it and they release a video. And I watch the video and the floors look very good, but what do the floors look like 6 months later? Did they hold up? Did they insulate as well as the people thought? I just really don't know. So like I said, over the past year, I've watched hundreds of van life related videos. And when it comes to the floor, I've learned that most people, but not everyone, agree that there are basically 3 parts to a van floor. You have to have some layer of insulation, you have to have some layer of support like plywood, and then you have to have whatever is going to look nice on the top. Now, not everybody agrees with those 3 layers, but a lot of people do. And really, that's where everybody stops agreeing on anything. I've seen sub-layers made out of 1x2s with 1-inch insulation. I've seen it made with 2x2s with 2-inch insulation. I've seen subfloors made out of aluminum. Some people put Reflectix down, which everything I know about Reflectix, I don't think that would do anything at all. And some people totally eschew that level. They don't put anything down there. Then it comes to the wood. I've seen people put 1/2-inch plywood, 1/4-inch plywood, 3/4-inch plywood. I've seen people put MDF and all different types of wood down there. And then when it comes to the top layer, what do you do? Do you put vinyl tiles? Do you put laminate flooring down? Do you put stick-on tiles? I saw someone do that with contact paper. That didn't last long. I've even seen people put carpet back down as the top layer. So basically anything you can imagine for a van floor, I've seen people do. Now, there's one thing that all van life people do seem to agree on. It's that if you do the floor incorrectly, you will die. You will die from heat exposure. You will die from cold exposure. You will die from all the mold, the enemy of all van campers. So what are you supposed to do? All the tutorials are different. All the choices are different. You can find some that are similar this way, some that are similar in other ways. I mean, at the end, all I could do was take the best parts of what I thought from each video would work and put that together and start moving forward on this project. I don't feel like anything in this van is permanent. I feel like if I do something wrong and it doesn't work in a few months, I'll just take it apart and redo it again. This is a very liberating project for me. I've never owned a vehicle before that I took an angle grinder to. I've never owned a vehicle that I've cut a hole in the ceiling before. I was the type of person who was afraid to put a bumper sticker on my car because I didn't want to affect the value if I ever had to sell that car later. So this van is different. This van is something that I feel like I can modify every part of any way I want. And if I don't like the way it comes out, I can start over and do it again. So while I was struggling to figure out exactly how I wanted to build the subfloor of my van, I ran across this item for sale. This is called a bed rug van rug. I found it on Amazon. Again, not affiliated with the company. It was about $200 for sale. Now, what I had been planning to do was build a subframe out of either 1x2s or 2x2s and put layers of foam insulation in between that underneath a layer of plywood. I priced that out, and that was going to cost me somewhere between $120 and $150 to build. Plus, it was going to take several days. Plus, I'm not that good at building things. This seems to be a similar solution for $200. The other thing I was going to have to do is create a cardboard template of the floor, trace every in and out all the way down the wall that could be used to trace onto the plywood so that I would have a perfect fit. But by purchasing this, I've just purchased a template. Now, although this looks like carpet, it's really not. The bottom layer of this is foam, and the top layer is kind of an artificial looking carpet. Now, based on the ad, it says this will act as both a heat and noise insulator, and also says that it stands up to water and that it will not mold or mildew. And the best part of all is that Amazon can deliver it faster than I could build what I was planning to build in the first place. Well, it took Amazon about 3 days to deliver the mat. If you've ever carried carpet, I was expecting this box to weigh somewhere between 50 and 100 pounds, but with the mat inside, this box weighs about 10 pounds. The box was super easy to open, and it was easy to pull the mat out. By the way, I don't have a preference of doing live audio versus voiceover work, but the reality is I'm still getting used to YouTube, and I constantly have TV shows and copyrighted music playing in my workshop, so I've got to remember to turn that stuff off before I start recording. Now, as you can see, this mat was rolled pretty tightly, and I was afraid that I was going to have trouble flattening it out. I tried unrolling it, and as you can see, it rolled back up immediately. My solution for this was to lay the mat flat down on the floor of my workshop and weigh down the corners with bar stools. I've collected a lot of tools and toys and all kinds of things throughout my life, and apparently one of the things I've collected is bar stools. After about 30 minutes, I flipped the mat over right side up and replaced the bar stools and let the mat finish flattening out. I couldn't wait to see how well this thing fit. Just look at all the nice cuts all the way down the side. It's got cutouts for the wheel wells and all those little notches and everything. So I decided to go ahead and do a test fitting. I picked the mat up, walked it right to the van, and as you can see, tossed this inside, and it was a perfect fit. I've watched videos where people struggled with putting in their plywood floor for days. Installing this mat took about 30 seconds. Once the mat was in, I wanted to see just how comfortable it was, so I crawled in, and having worked on the van for about 8 hours, it wasn't long before I drifted off to sleep. Night night, Big Rob. The following morning, the family and I headed out for spring break. We had rented a cabin in Broken Bow, Oklahoma, which is about a 4-hour drive for us. On our drive there, we stopped in Norman, Oklahoma to pick up my son. And last weekend, a tornado hit Norman, and we were a little shocked to discover just how close to his house the damage was. Oklahoma's a funny place. It has some beautiful things to see and experience, but you've always got to keep one eye open during tornado season. For our vacation, we rented a cabin for 4, but due to some sort of mix-up, we ended up with a cabin that slept 20. I knew something was off when I entered the garage and discovered a small rec center. Here's what the main room looked like. Our cabin had 3 king-size beds, 2 full-size beds, 4 queen-size bunk beds, and a bunch of couches big enough to sleep on. That doesn't include the second cabin, which was connected to ours, that had more sleeping arrangements and, you know, that rec room. After unpacking and resting for a few hours, my wife wanted to go check out a place called the Showman's Rest, often referred to as the Circus Cemetery in nearby Hugo, Oklahoma. Hugo is or was a winter home for traveling circus performers, and many of them choose to be buried there when they pass away. Now, I don't personally know any circus performers, but being a part of a circus seems like it could be both very exciting, but also kind of lonely. I know some of the acts are made up of families, but a lot of them aren't, and all of them in their own way chose or choose to live outside of society's norms and pursue the life that they want. And as I walk through the rows of headstones with images of tightrope walkers, elephant trainers, and yes, even Popcorn the Clown, I couldn't help but think that the people buried here aren't all that different from those who choose to live in their vans. It takes some courage to go against what society expects and take all your belongings and go out and hit the road, whether that's as a part of a traveling circus or in a van. Later that evening, the kids lit a fire in the fire pit and cooked hot dogs while I soaked nearby in the hot tub watching the sunset through the trees. The kind of trees that remind you just how small you really are. We had a great couple of days at the cabin, but I have to admit I was getting a little anxious to get back home so I could resume working on the van. Back at home and fully refreshed from my vacation, it was time to get back to work. The first thing I had to do was pull the mat back out. There was still some work I needed to do on the metal floor. One of those issues are these metal brackets which are welded to the floor and I believe originally held the jack in the van. I'm not exactly sure. But before I can install the subfloor, the flooring inside the van has to be flat, so these little brackets have to go. Throughout this video, you'll slowly see the safety gear that I was wearing continue to increase. I added gloves, I always wear goggles, I added noise-canceling earmuffs, and eventually I even put on a mask. I'm not gonna lie, I have 30 minutes of footage of me grinding things down in the van. Like I said earlier, I've always been afraid to modify or add things onto my vehicles. So applying an angle grinder to the corner of your van and watching sparks fly is kind of fun. This is a really bad angle of the action, but a really good angle of the sparks. Now the inside of this van's floor was kind of confusing to me. I wasn't exactly sure everything that I was seeing on the floor, but it appears there's a layer of white paint, obviously, which was the original paint color of the van, and then the previous owners put down some sort of spray liner. It's not a tough, like a truck bed liner or rhino liner, but some sort of black liner that doesn't cover the entire van, just some of it. In addition to that, there are plenty of surface rough spots underneath where the shelves were. I suspect there may have been water standing underneath the original shelves that were installed in the van. And on top of that, there's plenty of good old-fashioned Oklahoma red dirt, which unfortunately is the exact same color as the rust. So without scrubbing and wiping everything down, it's pretty difficult to tell which parts are rust and which parts are just dirty. Fortunately, the angle grinder seems to be able to cut through both very quickly. I'm pretty new to angle grinding, so I tried a bunch of the different wheels. This angle grinder came with a cutting wheel, which obviously you don't want to use, and a grinding wheel, but I did get an accessory pack from Amazon that included some sanding wheels and different types of grinding wheels. The most useful accessory for this Ryobi angle grinder is additional batteries. With the large extended size battery, I was able to grind for 5 minutes, give or take. With the smaller regular batteries that came with my drill and some of the other tools, they only lasted for about 3 minutes. I have 5 batteries and 3 chargers, and at times I was convinced that's not enough for this project. My ultimate goal is not to sand down the entire floor, but only address the really big problem parts. There are several sections, like I said, that have some surface rust, so I'll be grinding all those down. I've also purchased Rust-Oleum primer as well as some Rust-Oleum paint, so when I'm done, I'll be retouching the floor everywhere where it needs before putting the foam back in. I spent the majority of the weekend sanding and grinding on the inside of the van, getting everything ready to install the subfloor. As long as the weather holds out, I should be able to go pick up some lumber, come back, trace the plywood floor, and get everything installed. It looks like we might have to wait until episode 3 for that.